Welcome to another edition of Daily Airline News, focusing on the tragic loss of Air India Flight 171. I'm Geoffrey Thomas, and I'm delighted to say joined by my co-host Richard Godfrey in Frankfurt, Germany. Good morning to you, Richard.
And good afternoon to you, Geoffrey.
So, viewers, we promised you FADEC questions, and that's what we're going to give you today. And let's kick off straight away with the Hound Dog 2343, who asks, with FADEC redundancy, how is it possible to have a dual engine cutoff other than moving manually the fuel cutoff levers, switches? Question mark. Richard.
Yeah, it's a great question and gets directly to the heart of the matter. In my view, the fuel switches were moved physically and mechanically from one position to another. But some viewers, as obviously Hound Dog has noted, are saying that the physical position of the fuel switches did not change. They point out the logical system state associated with that switch was changed or transitioned. And people accept that the FDR data marked with a timestamp event tracks that switch signal change from one state to another. I question that view, and I think the fuel switches were moved physically. And here's my reasoning. Firstly, as Hound Dog points out, the system has redundancy. So there are two engines, there are two FADECs, and each FADEC has two channels. And then there are two signal paths from the fuel switches to the FADEC, one via a relay and the other via a remote data concentrator, an RDC. And these are two separate relays, one for each switch, and two separate RDCs. And they're powered by two separate electrical power buses. So the theory, as put forward by some, is that the EAFR FDR spuriously recorded both engine 1 and engine 2, the fuel switches transitioning from run to cutoff and then subsequently from cutoff back to run. So the scenario comprises a total of 4 EAFR FDR records, which they claim did not physically and mechanically take place. Now, we note that the engines N1 and N2 were decreasing, and the FADEC commenced the relight sequence. We know the APU inlet door opened as expected for the auto start sequence. We know the RAT deployed. We know both engine 1 and engine 2 were eventually successfully relit, and the effect of relight is recorded by the EAFR FDR system. The preliminary report states the exhaust gas temperature was observed to be rising for both engines, indicating relight. And it goes on to detail the recovery procedures. This implies both engines were functioning, both FADECs were functioning, the APU auto start, the RAT deployment, and the FDR were functioning. In this scenario, apparently only the fuel switches were not functioning correctly. The fuel valves in both engines are controlled by the fuel switches by these two paths via relays and the RDCs. And if the FADEC was functioning and both engine relights were successful, then the FADEC problem, if there was any, was a simultaneous momentary glitch. The fuel system relays are powered by two separate buses, the left engine spar valve relay powered by the left DC bus and the right engine spar valve relay powered by the right DC bus. So what I don't understand is exactly what electrical fault is proposed would shut down both engines almost simultaneously, given the power bus and FADEC redundancy. So I understand Hound Dog's question fully. In other words, what is the intermittent common mode fault in the fuel control switch assembly or the wiring upstream of the relays that could command both valves to close simultaneously? I'm still looking, but I haven't found that fault yet. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So, in summary, the Boeing 787 has engine fuel control switches, which are two independent command paths to the fuel shutoff system: a direct hardwired path and a dedicated relay to the engine spar valve, and a data-driven path via the engine's dedicated RDC to the engine dedicated FADEC, which then commands the valve and the HMU to close. Each engine has its own relay, its own RDC, and its own FADEC. So there's a lot of redundancy, and the electrical power is also provided from two separate buses. That's a hell of a lot that's got to go wrong to cause a problem.
Yes, the redundancy is quite amazing, Richard, isn't it? It's a very complex aeroplane, and we must remember here that this 171 is the first fatal loss of a 787 in
Yeah.
what's it, 11, 12, 13 years, whatever it is. It's an amazing
13 and
record.
a half, 13
13
and
and
a
a half.
half.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hmm.
So Joseph, Juliet 9 Romeo 7 Golf says, why the deafening silence from the NTSB? They were involved with the investigation and now, apparently, are no longer doing anything involving AI 171. This may be premature, but the no comment routine makes the ATSB look inept at best. Is it a professional courtesy, right or wrong? The public will perceive silence from those who are paid to speak as a cover up. And Purple Peter Eaters, Juliet 8 Juliet says, how does the flying public not have the right to see hard data from this flight? What can we do to make this a right rather than be at the mercy of small, perhaps biased, restrained investigative group of people? And Rick Young, 8489, why would they not just release the full CVR transcript, all voice exchange, and full CVR audio to hear the cockpit noises, and the full ECAS message list and relevant FDR transcript? Full transparency should be mandated, or you don't fly in international airspace. I like that. Cover up could seriously be endangering the flying public. Is it a human factor issue, an aircraft issue, or an Air India issue? The public deserves to know. A FADEC failure doesn't seem to align with the voice exchange between pilots that has so far been released. So there's three interesting and very good questions there, Richard.
Yes, there are, and we pointed out time and again that the lack of data that's been released, and it would actually be quite straightforward to issue an appendix or an addendum to the preliminary report with the currently available data, which includes the FDR, the CVR, the ICAS messages, and the FADEX logs. And you have to ask why this has not been done.
But also, we must point out to Joseph about the silence from the NTSB. The reality is that the AAIB leads this investigation. The NTSB and the British AAIB and some other authorities are parties to the investigation, and they typically will only really speak up when the final report comes out, if there's any discrepancies there. Although we do know the NTSB has made some statements about this one, but typically they keep a low profile. That's the protocol governed by the International Civil Aviation Organization, rightly or wrongly. Um, Anthony Dolo, 8118. Awesome conversation. Your discussion about the FADEC raised a more general question in my mind. Do the authors of an aviation accident report have a duty to disprove any or all possible accident causes? I ask this because you said that we could not rule out certain possible causes because the preliminary report does not include engine parameter timelines before cut-off, the FADEC maintenance logs, and the ICAS message history. Can we assume that those items were not included because the author decided they were irrelevant to their findings and or the cause of the crash? There have been so many theories, many of them speculation, that I can envisage a report swelling up to hundreds of pages if it must demonstrate that all these speculations are false. Richard.
Yeah, well, the ICAO issues clear guidelines on accident and incident investigation. The so-called ICAO Annex 13 is the Aircraft Accident and Incident Investigation Guidelines. There is also a manual of aircraft accident and incident investigation, Doc 9756. You can look it up. And the purpose of the report is not to apportion blame or liability. The sole objective is accident prevention. So the people who are investigating are invited to provide a factual analysis with conclusions and safety recommendations so that a similar occurrence can be avoided in the future. There is actually a recommended format, but it's only recommended, it's not mandatory. And we're showing a screenshot of the ICAO investigation report, 19 chapters, starting with the history of the flight and going on through aircraft information, the weather information, and the circumstances and the findings that have been reached. And it ends up with safety recommendations that should be made. So that will give conclusions. The final report will give a conclusion based on the findings and the causes. And the intended audience is the aviation industry. And the key is the safety recommendations. So it goes out to the authorities, the operators, the manufacturers, and others who are relevant for aircraft safety. And the recommendations must be clear, specific, and practical. So the audience is not the general public, and it's certainly not the media who want to play a blame game. It's sent officially to the ICAO, the states of registry, the state of operator, design, manufacturer, and any state with a special interest. And it is the ICAO do encourage a public release in order to ensure transparency. And the ICAO also sets out how to handle differences that may occur between the different states involved. And factual disagreements are addressed during the investigation and before the final report is published. So there's a draft of the final report, which is circulated to all accredited states, and they have 60 days to comment. And whether they make those comments public or not is probably they will keep them private. And if there are disagreements, those are included verbatim in the report, or the investigating state appends them in a separate section if they're not accepted. So the final report should be pretty clear on any unresolved differences. And this ensures transparency, and the public can see where the states disagree. and there is no requirement to answer any formal letters to the AAIB India made by a member of the public like me. I've written two so far.
Yes, we should mention the disagreement element there, Richard. The Ethiopian max crash. The Ethiopian report. The Ethiopians refused to add in comments from the French BEA because they're an investigative party to the crash, because the engine is a Safran General Electric CFM engine. And so they put it up on their website, which was unprecedented for the BEA to do that, which was quite an extraordinary move.
Yeah.
So KRMISC4 SN8VH, I won't try and pronounce that, so I've spelled it out. Richard and Geoffrey, is it possibly time to discuss certain relevant sections of the QRH, FCTM and FCOM concerning procedure for dual engine fail flameout, or in older material, I think the same but labelled dual engine failure stall? Also, perhaps something on FADEC, EECS, FMU relationships.
Yeah, well, good suggestion, and thank you for that. In the 50 plus episodes, we are working our way through all possible accident scenarios and relevant Boeing and GE documentation. We have cited the QRH, the FCTM, FCOM, and the AMM and other manufacturers' documentation and relevant specifications. So we'll take up your suggestion to do an episode specifically on the dual engine shutdown failure and the systems involved. We've already outlined the procedures and the ICAS messages and the systems involved in various episodes. Very briefly, episode 120 was on fuel and engines, 125 on avionics, 138 on fuel and electric factors, 141 on avionics analysis, 143 on the fuel cutoff or run, 144 on engine failure, 155 on cognitive disorder, 157 on system disorder, 163 on engine shutdown, and 178 on FADEC explained. So we've covered a lot of ground, but we can cover in more depth as you suggest.
So Rick FZ1, is there any way the FDR can record a fuel switch off without the switches having been moved physically, i.e. so that it appears the fuel control switches were moved to the cutoff position when they actually were not?
Yeah, this is a point that a lot of people are making. And to recap, there are two fuel switches with two data paths, one via a relay and one via the RDCs. So you have a very clear set of redundancy in the system. And, please show us the definitive or probable intermittent common mode fault, which would lead to the simultaneous timing. And please consider there was a raft of other systems that were still functioning, and the eventual successful relights of both engines is also a very strong clue as to what was not going wrong. And it leaves very little opportunity for a intermittent, simultaneous failure. And frankly, it is very remote that the switches were not physically moved.
Richard Jackson 3967 asks, has anyone heard any more about the LATAM 787 that experienced an unexpected rat deployment not long after takeoff the other day?
Yeah, many viewers have raised this and we've answered online. The same aircraft that had the emergency landing following rat deployment back in LAX, departed 24 hours later to Chile, and arrived safely, uneventfully. The damage, if any, was certainly not catastrophic and obviously easily repaired. We still don't know what the reason was for the emergency landing. The same aircraft has since flown back to LAX and then back to Chile again. It's the 787-8 registration CCBBI, if anyone wants to follow it in Flight Radar or Flight Aware. And it is equipped with Rolls-Royce engines and the Trent 1000 FADEC, so it's not directly relevant to the Air India case.
Signal electrician who lives in New South Wales on the north coast. I do know this. Good evening, guys. Keep up the pressure on the AAIB. We admire your resolve in this matter.
Yeah, well,
Nice.
many thanks, Signal Electrician. We like
Yeah,
comments like that.
yeah, we do. We do. Um, QUMBI1. This is something straight out of sci-fi. If a crash is imminent and impending, why cannot an AI logic of an airplane deploy hordes of sturdy airbags under the belly to minimize the impact damage, just like in cars? Or if it's ditching or crashing into the sea, to make the whole thing float? Boeing, Airbus, question mark? Anyone, question mark? It's an interesting
Yeah,
concept.
yeah. Haven't thought about deploying huge airbags, I must say. But as far as AI logic, there is no artificial intelligence system directly controlling primary flight surfaces on any airliner in revenue service today. AI is used in planning and maintenance and other areas, but not directly in primary flight control.
So Colin Bailey, 5672, says the 787 does not have bleed air systems. And replying, our friend KRM ISC4, 787 uses bleed air for two functions. One is to apply pressure, pressurize the hydraulic system. Yes, it does use a lot less bleed air for far fewer functions compared to previous aircraft.
Yeah. Colin, you're right when you're being precise and semantically correct. Um, the term bleed air is an old-fashioned term as far as the 787 is concerned. But there is a bleed air substitute in the fact that electric compressors are used to create a bleed air, if you will. And those are driven by the aircraft's electrical systems. So, yes, bleed air per se, as in the old days, doesn't get used, but electrical compressors do get used. So it might be a bit semantic, your point.
Mm. Gaza LDN, you guys are holding out the possibility that the pilots turned the fuel cutoff switches in response to a fault, but no sane pilot is cutting off the fuel to the engine at 100 feet or so, let alone leaving them off for 9 to 13 seconds. Richard.
Well, Gaza, we're not holding out, but I would ask you back, how do you explain the slow acceleration on the runway? And how do you explain the rat deployment 3 to 4 seconds before the fuel switches were moved to cutoff? We're not holding out. We're simply not coming to a premature conclusion without foundation. So, sorry if you think we're holding out, but we have a different view.
Mech 3303. Since each engine has its own FADEC and each has two channels, both FADECs and all have four channels, would need to fail at exactly the same instant. You have a better chance of winning the Powerball lottery. Now, replying to that was Patrick Flooding, 7985, who says, so no one wins the lottery. That's a good answer.
Yeah. Well, people do win the lottery, and each lottery is different, but there are around several 100 million to one probability. So you do have a chance of being that one. The goal in aircraft systems is less than 1 in 1 billion flying hours probability of a failure. So, yeah, we're sort of talking in big numbers in both cases.
So Aircraft Renee 8299 never flew the 787, but I don't remember any checklist or a memory item that states that fuel cutoff switches need to be cycled in flight in any scenario. And replying, Ori Zaba 18000, the 787 dual engine failure checklist memory item is to move both switches to cut off and then to run. There is no requirement to wait 10 seconds or at all.
Well, sorry, gentlemen, but both of you are wrong. Um, if there is an engine fire, the memory item is to move the fuel switch to cut off straight away without waiting. If there's a single or dual engine failure, the memory item is to leave the fuel switch in run and let the FADEC try to relight the engine. The only time you recycle the fuel switches is if the FADEC engine auto relight fails, because by recycling the fuel switches, you force the relight sequence to restart. So you have to go through the memory item checklists very carefully, one by one, and be mindful of the context of that memory checklist.
Richard, Martin White 418, the problem with taking the position that the Anna flight was a different engine manufacturer, so not related, goes like this. Both the Anna flight and the Air India flight lost power to both engines within 400 feet of the ground. Now, if you had a 1958 Packard and you had installed a Lamborghini engine in it, and the engine caught on fire going down the road, so your custom car builder said, well, that's okay. I have this brand new Ferrari engine. I will swap it into the Packard. And you then drove this down the road and the Ferrari engine caught on fire. The problem might be with the builder of the vehicle, not of either engine.
Oh, very interesting analogy, Martin. And obviously, I don't have a 1958 Packard with either a Lamborghini or a Ferrari engine. In the Anna Flight 985 Rolls-Royce Trent 1000 FADEC incident, it actually happened after landing by premature thrust reverser activation by the flight crew. On the 17th of January 2019, the Boeing 787-8 NH985 from Tokyo Haneda to Osaka Itami Airport. Shortly after touchdown and during rollout, the crew attempted to deploy the thrust reversers. Immediately thereafter, both Trent 1000 engines shut down simultaneously. So it's not just a different engine, it's a different FADEC and a different situation. In the context of a GE NX-1B FADEC, the cause of the Air India crash, or the possible cause, and the Rolls-Royce Trent 1000 FADEC is not directly relevant. And the incident took place after landing and thrust reverser deployment and not during takeoff phase, which is the Air India accident flight phase. So I think your Packard and Lamborghini and Ferrari analogy is a bit of a stretch.
Yes, I think so. Well, viewers, that's all we've got time for today. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to us. Please like us. Please keep those comments coming. And of course, keep those fantastic questions coming. And Richard, thank you very much indeed for your analysis of these questions today. And tomorrow we're going to take a day off, viewers, but we're coming back on Friday with an episode called System Glitches, which I think you'll find very interesting indeed. So please join us for that. So once again, Richard, thank you very much indeed for your time today. It's been terrific. And
You're
viewers,
very welcome.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.